primarily as a dance artist, and he caused some consternation when he released a hard rock album. His new album is called I Like to Score, and it's a collection of songs which have been featured in movies. And one of them is his own brand new arrangement of the classic James Bond theme. So to perform that, we'd like you to welcome, please, it says here, the confusing, annoying, enlightening, exciting, thrilling New Yorker Richard Hill, better known to you and me as Moby. Moby, over there. That's it. Moby.
Bond. James Bond.
Noisy, isn't it? Could you hear that? You could just... Right, that was Moby there, and the James Bond theme. Thank you very much indeed. You could hear all of that, could you? You could make it out. Very good. All right. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when my next guest made her first visit to New York at the start of her career, a bystander was looking at her doing various things, and in the middle of the crowd, and he said, "Yeah, she's cute. She should last a couple of weeks." That was 30 years ago. She is probably most famous as the world's first real supermodel, the person who summed up the look of a decade, because that indeed is what she did. However, since those early days, she's not only lasted more than a few weeks, she's gone on to forge a terrific career for herself in films and especially on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Twiggy. Twiggy. Hello.
How are you?
Lovely to see you. You're very welcome. Sit down. Sit down. I've been a fan of yours ever since you started.
Thank you very much.
Ever since you started, I've been a great fan. You've been in Ireland for the last week or so, yeah?
We have, and actually we heard your radio programme yesterday. We were driving through the Wicklow Mountains, which was so beautiful.
Yes.
And it was about lunchtime.
Yes.
It was a really good programme.
But thank you very much indeed. But you were down in Skull as well,
we were.
weren't you?
We flew
Donegal
to Cork last Sunday, and we visited some friends in Skull.
Yes.
And then we did the Ring of Kerry, which last time we were in Ireland we couldn't do because it was foggy and rainy.
Yes, you couldn't see
and people said, don't go, you won't see a thing.
Don't bother.
So we did it this time. It was fantastic because not only was it beautiful weather, it was very quiet because of the time of the year.
And you visited Ava and Richard, did you?
We did, and they send you all their
Thank
love.
you very much indeed. You see, well, reading your book, I was amazed to find that, and we do send them our regards to Ava and Richard.
We do,
regards down there in Skull. Nice to know that you're well and doing your thing. I was amazed. You're most famous as a model, but you only did 4 years of modelling.
I only did 4 years, yeah. I stopped modelling in 1970 to do The Boyfriend with Ken Russell.
Yes.
And once I started to do the film, I mean, I was very nervous because, you know, it was something so new to me. Not only had I never acted before, I'd never sung and I'd never danced. But I had this wonderful man saying, yeah, you can do it. And he was a huge director at that time. And I had his faith in me, and he convinced me that I could do it. And once I kind of started to do it, it was like, wow, this is amazing. This is what I want to do, you know.
Yeah.
So I made the choice of...
Comes off the page that you really got passionate about acting and performing, which you didn't really have for modelling.
No, because, well, you know, I didn't plan to be a model. You know, I was 16 and a half when that all happened to me. I was a baby. And when I was at school, I wanted to be a designer. I wanted to go to art school, and I always loved clothes. I was always passionate about clothes and fashion and makeup, as most teenage girls are. I've got my daughter's now nearly 19, and she's passionate about clothes and makeup, and spends hours in her room, you know, painting her face, and and tells me off daily that I didn't keep all my mini skirts and my bell bottoms because I didn't. But so I think that was just a normal thing. So I certainly didn't plan to model because I thought that I was rather a strange looking thing. I was really skinny, as you know.
Yes.
So when that whole thing happened to me, I was as surprised as everyone else.
Nothing to do with bulimia or anorexia or anything.
No,
you were just skinny.
I was just skinny. I was just like my dad.
Yes.
No, I ate like a horse, actually. I used to desperately want to put on weight, so I'd eat and eat and eat and eat, and nothing would happen.
Yeah. Now looking at your daughter, who's 19,
Yeah.
and looking back at yourself at 16 and a half, 17, you travelled the world at that stage. You know?
I know. I mean, I don't think... I mean, when you are that age, you feel very grown up. It's only looking at my daughter, who's, as you say, is nearly 19, and I think, God, I was so young. And it's quite scary, and I was very green, you know. I'd never... I mean, at least my daughter's kind of travelled with us, and kind of lived the life I now lead, which is travelling a lot and, you know, living in different places. All I'd been was in Neasden in North London, you know, that was it. I mean, it was a happy childhood, which was lovely, and I was very close to my mum and dad and my sisters. And I think that was the backbone that kind of got me through all that kind of madness. Because it was, for a couple of years, it was insane.
I want you to tell them the story. The people we're talking about in Skull is Ava Astaire, who is the daughter of Fred Astaire, the great Fred Astaire. Tell them the story about your wanting to meet Fred. And
well, in 1970, I did The Boyfriend, as I just mentioned, with Ken Russell directing. And when it was released, I went, you know, you go and promote it, and I went to Los Angeles, and MGM, I went to the studio and I met all the heads of the studio. And they said, right, is there anyone you'd like to meet? You know, any film star? And I said, and my hero forever had been Fred Astaire, you know, and still is. You know, I just thought he was the greatest thing ever, and nobody can move like Fred can move. So I said, oh, I'd love to meet Fred Astaire. And they went, oh,
problem.
Is anyone else you'd like to meet? And I said, no, not really. And I said, why? And they said, well, you know, Fred's retired and he keeps very much to himself, and he's kind of a recluse, and, you know, we don't think we can. I said, you know, well, I wouldn't bother him, but you asked me who I wanted to meet, and he's my hero. So, and then we went on to something else. I went back to the hotel. There happened to be in the office that afternoon a lady at the back of the office who'd overheard this, and she'd worked on all the Fred and Ginger movies with Fred, and if they'd remained friends. And when I left, she rang him up and told him the story that I'd been in the office and said that I really wanted to meet him. And I got an invitation to tea, and she called me at the hotel and said, "You're invited up tomorrow to tea." And I was so excited and so nervous. You know, it's very hard to meet your hero because sometimes it can be a letdown, which I must preface, it wasn't with Fred. He was just tremendous. So I went to tea the next day, and he was absolutely lovely. And that's where I met Ava, because Ava was at the house, and a few months later when we became friends, she said, "You know why I was at the house that afternoon with Daddy?" And I said, "No, why?" And she said, "Because when you were coming up to tea, he rang me and said, 'Will you come over and be with me, because Twiggy's coming to tea and I'm terrified.'" Which is so sweet, isn't it?
Yeah.
But he was gorgeous. He was so wonderful, so modest. And when he walked across the room,
way he, walked
nobody
that
walks
way.
like, I mean, nobody dances like that, but nobody walks like that.
That's right, yes, yes.
And what's nice is I've remained friends with Ava all these years.
And
it's
he
lovely.
didn't dance for you or anything like that?
Not then, but when I went back on another trip, I can't remember, I was there for something, and called him up, because we used to kind of keep in touch, and he said, "Let's have dinner," and we went out to, it's not there anymore, it was like a kind of Polynesian restaurant in Beverly Hills, and we went, we had ordered the meal, and I saw going past, you know those drinks they do in the coconut things with all the umbrellas and, you know, the ribbons, and they're bright pink, and I said, "Oh, I want one of those." So I had one, so Fred said, "Oh, I want one of those." And they, you know, they're not ever so strong, but you know, I think they've got rum in or something. And I was certainly not then a drinker. I mean, I like a glass of wine now, but then I didn't really drink, so I felt quite jolly. And Fred didn't drink very much, but you know, they were fun. So we left the restaurant very happy, and he parked the car down the road. And as we were, and he hadn't danced, you've got to bear in mind at that point,
for
years. And we're walking down Rodeo Drive or wherever it was, and he started to tap dance down the street.
Did he really?
It was a dream. It was just a dream. And he just danced down the street and did a double pirouette and landed on his knees with his hands up and went, "Hollywood, I love you."
Good.
And I thought, I can't believe this. I'm standing on Rodeo Drive and Fred Astaire has just tap danced down the street. And then I thought, well, if people were driving by, you know, they'd say, "You know, honey, I just think
I thought that was Fred Astaire." And Twiggy. I must give up the booze.
Exactly.
Ava, in fact, tells a story because Fred Astaire was on the Late Late Show many years ago. Peter Ustinov. They were here making a movie called The Purple Taxi. And they were staying in the old Hibernian Hotel in Dawson Street, is now long since gone. It was rather old-fashioned at that stage. And Ava told the story that she went in late one afternoon and she was walking along the corridor and his door was open. And there was some music coming off the telly. And he was moving to around the room, just doing a little movement. It was a lovely, lovely memory.
But he was, one of the most wonderful men I've ever met.
Mind you, you didn't do so well with Princess Margaret, I understand.
No. Well, I mean, I didn't have any axe to grind, but it was way back in the kind of early late middle 60s after I'd been discovered. And it was my first kind of posh dinner party that I'd been invited to. And I didn't know there was going to be a royal there, and we arrived, and it was a summer's night, and there was drinks in the garden, and there were quite a lot of kind of pop people there and artists. It was a mixture, and then we were told that Princess Margaret was coming, and that when she came, you know, what the protocol was. You had to say "Mom," and you know, and you couldn't leave, if you were at the table, you couldn't leave the table till she left the table, and all things like that, which was fine. And I was at the table that she was put on. And there were 8 people, and I was next to the host, which was this man called Lord Dufferin, who's sadly no longer with us. And he was really sweet. And his wife worked at Vogue magazine, and that's how I knew her, and Lindy, she was lovely. And that's how I got invited. And I was really nervous, because not only I had Princess Margaret at the table, and I'd never really met royalty before, but I also had those 10,000 knives and forks. And I thought, oh my God, I remember sitting down thinking, oh, please, I can't. So I just wait for other people.
Everybody else, yes, do the same. Yes.
Anyway, she arrived and we stood, and she didn't, you know, and we kind of stood, and then she sat, so we sat, and she didn't really acknowledge me or anything, so it was fine. So food arrived, and I'd wait, you know, and then I'd pick my fork up. And we got to the pudding platform, and she hadn't looked at me or spoken to me. And suddenly, and I was feeling quite relaxed by then, I was chatting away to, you know, Sheridan Dufferin, and then suddenly she kind of turned to me, and she had a cigarette, and she went, and what's your name? And I said, my name's Leslie Hornby, ma'am, but everyone calls me Twiggy. And she went, oh, how unfortunate. And turned around.
That was it. She could not have known who you were. She could not have known.
But it's a good story, though. But it's a true story, I promise you.
True story. Now, several things. First of all, oh yes, getting into My One and Only, the Broadway show and so on, and talking about Fred Astaire, who taught you to dance? You had never been a dancer.
I hadn't. It's weird, actually. I basically started when Ken cast me in The Boyfriend. That's why I owe Ken Russell so much, because he had this vision of what I could do. I didn't know I could do it. And he sent me off to class there. They were my early beginnings. Then Tommy Tune was cast in The Boyfriend, because I'd seen him on telly in America, and I told Ken about him, this amazing dancer. And we spent, after The Boyfriend, we spent 2 years doing class. I learned a lot from him then, because we were trying to set a film up, and I'd have classes with Tommy learning all his steps. So when we got to do the Broadway show, the film didn't happen, we couldn't get the finance raised. But when we finally, 12 years later, did the Broadway show, I'd kept my classes. When he'd gone back to America, I kept my classes going.
Done.
And then when we did the show, when you dance on Broadway every night for 18 months, you learn a lot. I mean, I'm not in his class or Fred's class, but you know, I learned.
You learned to dance.
Wonderful,
wonderful.
What I did.
Ran for 2 years.
Yeah, we ran for 2 years. It was a wonderful show. It was Gershwin, all Gershwin. You know, when you're singing Gershwin every night, it's a joy.
But to make the transition from being just a model, as people would say to that, is a terrific achievement.
Thank you.
Various things. You were always associated with Justin de Villeneuve, and people described him as your Svengali and guru and all of that.
Yeah,
that wasn't so.
It was, and that's one of the reasons I did my book, because, you know, once a long time ago it was written. I think it made a great headline, Svengali. It's a great title, isn't it? You know, and I'm sure by meeting me, you can see, I mean, I'm not so, I've got a very strong will, I've got my own mind. Nobody's ever been able to boss me about. I'm actually the bossy one, ask my husband. But I think most women are actually, don't you?
Yes, I found that. Yes, I discovered this.
So I just wanted to put the record straight, that, you know, it was, he was my boyfriend at the time, and when that whole thing, that kind of madness happened, which literally happened overnight.
It was madness,
basically.
wasn't it? Yes.
My dad, quite rightly, and I understand, you know, said, if you're going to go out and do that, I want him to go along just to look after you, because, you know, there's lots of bad people out there. You're very, very young, which I was 16 and a half. So, and in those early interviews, he even admits that he had nothing to do with it. It was one of those bizarre things, you know, and it wasn't him who went out and learned to sing and dance, you know. I was not a puppet, and he was not a
Where is he
Svengali.
now?
I don't know.
You don't know?
When we split up,
You
we
split
kind
up,
of,
and that was the
I
end of
left,
it.
and
Did
that
you
was
make
it.
a lot of money, Twiggy, and did you keep it? No is the answer.
I earned quite a lot in that period, but unfortunately he was not very good on the money. I'd go out and buy a dress, and he'd go out and buy a Porsche, so it didn't really.
Would do it. Yes, that would do
so
it.
it was not. It was not. It was
left.
not well invested. Well, it wasn't invested at all.
Yes, and then during the time of my one and only, your husband Michael Whitney died.
Yeah, I was married by then, because I was never married to Justin. He was my manager, and I met Michael in '73, and found out 3 years into the relationship that he had an alcohol problem, which is, if anyone's ever gone through that with either a husband, wife, mother, father, you know, it's tough.
Right.
I don't regret the relationship, because I got my daughter out of it, and I love her dearly. She's the joy, along with my now husband, Lee Lawson, who I love to madness. You know, Carly and my stepson Ace are my joy.
You mean you love your husband now very much, do you?
I do.
So there's no chance for anybody else? you wouldn't even sort of consider it even? You know?
I'm very much in love.
Oh, jokes. This is the story of my life. What do you want, Dennis? A phone call you want? Okay, line one. We'll try line one and see which way. Hello, line one.
Hi, Twiggy.
Hi.
Hello.
I want to find out, please, what you think of the anorexic models of today. And, you know, what's your attitude towards them, you know, and a lot of children and, you know, the young girls coming up trying to be the same as them, you know?
Well, in a way, I mean, I faced that in the 60s, and I was always getting blamed for it. I mean, I've got articles from that period. I mean, I don't condone. I think actually the people to lay the blame, if there is any blame, are the people who run the magazines, because they should. I mean, I think now although I was very skinny, I always had this little round face and I always looked very healthy. I was very healthy. I never stopped eating. I don't know whether the girls eat or don't eat now because I'm nothing...
They don't?
No, a lot of them don't. And if they're not size 8,
well, you know, obviously...
10 at the maximum, 8 at the... 8,
Sorry?
8, size 8 preferably, 10
size
at the
8.
maximum, you know, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, some people are naturally thin like I was, but I did eat a lot, and I've always eaten. I've got a very healthy appetite. I love my food.
You've just got a good metabolism,
but
that's
I do
all.
think there is a
Caller.
problem, you know, for teenagers following that, and I don't know what the answer is.
No, you
I
did.
think magazines have just got to be a bit more responsible.
You're a great one for taking on new challenges. You did morning television just
I
last week or the week before, in the place of the pair.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, you enjoyed that?
I did. It was really scary. When they rang, because I did the show 2 weeks before, again, to promote my book. And it was fine. And the next day, the boss rang me and said, how do you feel like coming on for a week and co-hosting? I went, oh my goodness, that really scares me. Yes, I'll do it. Because I think it's good to do things that scare you.
You're not
sometimes.
afraid of doing things?
I was terrified, yeah. But
you're not afraid of falling flat on your face?
You know, what's the worst that could happen? I'm not, you know,
what is
it's
the
not
worst
going
that
to
can
kill
happen?
me, is it? And I thought it would be a great experience. And I had it, I mean, the Monday was scary.
Yes.
That was scary. Well, you know what it's like. You do it every week, but I'd never done it before. I'm usually in the other seat.
Yes, yes.
And they got me a lovely co-host called Mark Little, who had done Big Breakfast before. So he'd done live interviewing before. But actually, once the show's... The worst moment was 5 minutes before we went up, you know, on
I know
air.
the feeling well, yes.
And you think, what am I doing here? This is insane. I shouldn't have said yes. I think I've got to go home. But once you start, it's like a roller coaster.
You're terrific. You
and I
take on
had a
everything,
really great time.
Yeah.
And by Friday, I was having a wonderful time.
Yeah. Your mum and dad, your dad is not with us anymore.
No, sadly.
You really
He
loved him.
died
They
in
gave you a
91.
terrific grounding.
Yeah,
I think
they
that's
did.
how you came through that madness.
I think so. My dad, I'm very
showbiz and
like...
Broadway and
I'm
everything.
very like my dad. You know,
Are
he was North Country. He was from Lancashire. He was very down to earth, very straight talking, which I think I am.
Yes.
And very grounded, and I get that.
Yeah. One
from
thing
them.
always struck you speak very loudly.
I know,
You
well, my
always
dad
do.
was deaf.
Oh, is that the reason? Is that the reason?
He was deaf in one ear, so I grew up all my life.
Yes.
And I'm
Shouting.
really loud. It's funny because I did Blind Spirit this summer.
I never thought of that actually yet.
I did Blind Spirit in Chichester this summer, you know, the Noel Coward play, which was great.
Yeah.
I played Elvira. And the first day, the director said to me, now I might have to work with you on voice projection. And then when he got, by the end of the week, he said, I won't have to work with you.
You project, all right. Yeah. What do you think of paparazzi and all that thing that went on?
Well,
with
you know,
so you've
obviously...
had your fair share of it.
I had it, compared to what Diana went through, I had a tiny bit. I mean, I have experienced it. I don't approve of what they did to her. I don't think anyone can. No. And I think it did get to the point, and you know, that there has to be a cut-off between people's personal life in the public eye, and they have to have a private
And did you
life.
experience any of this?
In the 60s a little bit, and...
When Michael died?
When Michael died,
yes.
The next day, and unfortunately my daughter was with him when I wasn't around, but she was with him when he had his massive heart attack. He was in a restaurant with her.
And how old was she then?
She was 5.
5? In a restaurant?
Yeah.
And he died?
Yeah. It was pretty horrendous, obviously. And the restaurant people took care of her, and they got the police and the ambulance. But the next day, there was nothing that could be done to help him, sadly, and the police took care of her and they got her home, and she remembered her address. She was amazing. But the next day I came out of the apartment building, and you know, we were pretty much in shock. And I was going for a walk with her, and there was this woman photographer, and I just lost it, quite honestly. I was so upset anyway, and I just went for her, and you know, she had a camera, and I just said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And she said, "You know, I'm taking a picture." And I said, "No way." And I grabbed the camera. I didn't smash it, actually. She's lucky I didn't smash it. I didn't, but I was just so incensed that she wanted, you know, and I just pulled the film out and just handed her back her camera.
Well done.
And she said, "You know, what are you doing, you know, that you can't?" And I said, "You know," well, I can't repeat what I said. But I think I was within my rights.
Dear me, you said fruitcake and words of that kind. Yeah, that sort of thing. So what are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? Is it television for you from here on?
Yes, and next year I'm going to do a show in New York that Lee's going to direct.
Wow.
Called Noel and Gertie. I'm going to play Gertie Lawrence. And I'm going to do, and I did a CD last year of all songs.
He specialises in Shakespeare.
He does. He's a wonderful actor.
Yes. Has he done Hamlet yet? No?
He did, a long time ago, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Gay, I'm just interested in how many pounds, if Twiggy wouldn't mind declaring, she's heavier now than you were when you were
She's
in
not.
your... Well,
Well, I am.
Oh.
I was about 6.5 stone then, and I'm 8 stone now.
you're still looking very well.
Thank you.
Isn't she? Isn't she just? Isn't she? Well done. Thank you for confirming that for me. Yes, sir.
Twiggy, I think you look super.
That's right.
Thank you.
See?
You look better now than you looked when you started
Thank
modelling.
you.
That's right.
I would like to ask you, for some girl looking in tonight,
Yeah.
who's thinking of going into modelling, what would be your
I
advice?
think the best advice I could give, I mean, because what happened to me was a one-off thing that doesn't happen very often. I mean, I didn't plan to be a model. But I think if somebody wants to model, and it is a wonderful career and can be, but I think the best thing one can do up front, if you think you've got it, or your parents or whatever think you've got it, is to go to a really proper bona fide model agency, because the good ones will tell you if you've got a chance. They'll arrange for you to get good photographs done. If you go to kind of second-rate ones or second-rate photographers, they'll just take your money, and that's not good.
How has it changed from the time you were doing it and now?
They're paid a lot more.
They're paid a lot more, absolutely. But it's because I'm an actress now. I meet the girls occasionally. It's a very different business now. I mean, it is a business now. I mean, it was a business then, but it's an industry now. When I modelled, I was a photographic model. I only did photographs. Now the girls do the catwalk, and it's a huge, huge multi-billion-dollar industry, the modelling. But what's interesting, when I was a little girl, you wanted to grow up and be either a film star or a ballet dancer. That was kind of the glamorous things. If you ask most little girls now what they want to be supermodels. It's interesting. They're like the glamorous, because the film stars stopped being glamorous.
Yes.
Apart from one or two, like Michelle Pfeiffer, who's glamorous, and that it went into that kind of more serious actress type.
Yes.
Now, so the glamour are the supermodels.
I have to let you go. Twiggy's book is called Twiggy in Black and White, an autobiography. It's a great read for anybody interested in the business or show business or modelling or whatever. And I'm delighted to see you looking so well.
Thank you.
You really are in
well.
terrific form, and quite clearly happy with this fellow, whatever his name is. So there you are. Anyway, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Very much.
Twiggy, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break. Go take a break. Welcome back. We are all agreed here in the studio. That Twiggy is a lovely, lovely person, and they enjoyed meeting her. Now, we had Danny DeVito on the show just before Christmas, on the night when we paid a special tribute to Daniel O'Donnell. And he gave us a lovely interview. He was here in connection with his new movie called Matilda, from the Roald Dahl tale. And it's a very, very funny movie. And he didn't bring a present. He didn't bring a prezi that night because he hadn't got... But he sent a prezi of the video of Matilda for everybody in the audience. A copy of Danny DeVito's Matilda from Roald Dahl. Very funny movie. Funny movie. Very funny movie. It's a lovely little tale to gladden the hearts of children everywhere, and we hope you enjoy it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is Halloween. Now, you know that traditionally this is the night when we welcome the dead into our homes. Does anybody get nervous talking about death or the dead? Stick around. You see, tonight the veil is torn between the living and the dead, and we can intermingle with the dead. And that is what the masks and the bonfires and the goblins and the ghosties are all about. All over the country as we speak. Those who are not watching the Late Late Show, poor unfortunate people, are out attending bonfires and doing firecrackers and all this sort of... And people I know get disturbed and fidgety and edgy when they talk about death. Don't get fidgety or... November is the month of the Holy Souls, and we're supposed to spend the next month remembering those of our friends and relatives and buddies and comrades who have departed this life. Christy Keneally here is an ex-priest, and at the age of 24 he became a chaplain at a hospice in Cork. And this week he publishes his account, which is very funny in many parts, very, very funny indeed, an account of his time there. And he's still involved in counselling people. John Donoghue, not to be confused with Father John O'Donoghue, with whom I spoke on the radio during the week. This is John Donoghue. He's a clinical psychologist with special skills in the area of counselling those who are bereaved, especially by violent death. And Paul Regine Clancy, you've heard with me on the wireless on many an occasion. She's a folklorist with a special interest in the lore of Halloween, and she also leads retreats on the topic of Celtic spirituality. Now, all three, let me say to you that never seen anybody die. I've never been present at the moment of death. Tell me your experience, Christy, of being present at a death. Any death you want to choose.
The one that comes to mind immediately, Gay, is my father's death, actually. My father had stomach cancer. He was dying over a 12-month period, and we were up and down and up and down. And the night he came to die, he had slipped into coma, and just before he died, he opened his eyes literally, looked around at all of us, and I think he blessed us at that minute. And then he smiled, and then he died.
Just like that?
Just like that.
John?
I've been at a lot of deaths, I suppose, but like Christy, two have impacted on me. One was the death of my son, where we found him dead. And I was just struck by the simplicity of going from life to death, with no sense of a transition.
How old was your son?
7 weeks. And
7 weeks.
it was a cot death. But it was just, up to then, I used to be quite scared of death. And from that moment on, for whatever reason, there was something I remember being struck by, going from kind of naught to death. Like, it's very hard to describe even, the sense of it, like. And I heard you on that interview, and I remember thinking, well, he'll have his moment, you know, or someone will. You will have your. You will.
I will have my moment.
When you are at your first death, and it is a.
Thanks very much, John. That's a very cheerful thought.
Well, you could die on the show, you know, like Tommy Trooper.
I've died on the show many times. I can tell you that, and will again.
We better help him out tonight. You know? But I remember being very struck at just the transition appearing so easy. 1 minute he was alive, the next minute. And in a way, the fact that it was sudden infant death adds to it, as there's no cause. So like it just happened. The other is like Christy, my dad's death. And he had been in coma for several hours, and he was dying and decreasing for lots and lots of hours. Because I was skilled, I knew almost like to the millisecond like how it was progressing. And even though he was imperceptibly living, when he died, the dahness went out of him.
The dahness went out?
The dahness. He wasn't da anymore beyond that moment. Now, I'm not saying I saw some like dark shadow or something, but the essence of him. Maybe that's what you describe.
Father Guy.
Well, I've had the privilege of being present at two deaths. One of them was my grandmother, who was like my best friend. She was 95. She died just off her 96th birthday. She died 2 years ago. She was the same age as the century. Just an extraordinary experience, really, just being present. And like what the others here have said, that it was a moment of peace. And in the case of the other person, it was a person who had been suffering from cancer, the father of a good friend of mine, and it was some 10 years earlier than my grandmother's death. And that man who had suffered, he turned and he seemed to smile as he went. I experienced that, and one of the nuns in the hospice at the time said, you caught that look of peace. Now, when my grandmother was dying, I was so close to my grandmother. It's a great privilege to be able to talk about her on a night like tonight and remembering her. But I have her wedding ring on here. I'm not married myself, but I have her ring here. And, you know, it was an extraordinary thing. I thought she was going to turn around, sort of, and give me a big smile and wave and go off, and that would be what I'd seen before. But it wasn't like that, actually. But it was an extraordinary, she just literally got, you know, a turn, as they say, and there was a call, and I went in, and we'd spoken in our lives about being there at the last moment, and I just happened to be there with one other person, and I held her hand, and I said all her prayers, the ones that she had, you know, said, and they came to me because they wouldn't, some of them very, very traditional words in them. I like Jesus, Mary and Joseph, I give you my heart and my soul, assist me in my last agony. These all came up in me even. Maybe I hadn't said them myself. They just came to me because she had said them in her life. And at that moment, like, she just passed, you know, pour forth my soul in peace with you, amen. And it was just an extraordinary moment. And I thanked her. This was for me it was great to see. I don't know how great it was for her because she hasn't come back and told me yet, but I felt that it must have been, because they say that your hearing is the last thing to go.
Yes.
So I was like there at the bedside and holding her hand. I was saying, Mamo, I called her Mamo. Mamo, you're going home tonight, because she was talking all the time at the hospital about going home. And I said, she was in the hospital, and I said, you're going home tonight. And I meant, I said, Mother will be there and Father will be there. And I named all her brothers and sisters because they'd all gone before her, and she was the last. And I said, and thank you for the long life. And she was a great pianist. She was from the middle of Dublin, and she had the great tradition of piano playing. And she played. I said, thanks for all the piano playing, the music, and I just felt great. You know, in a way, the one thing that I would have to say that I felt was difficult was the fact that one couldn't get in closer to her in the course of her dying because she's in hospital. There is a sense in which you're away from it. Yeah. And I would have loved, for example, I found it very difficult that night to walk away from her and leave her in the hospital because I had experienced, I lived a little bit in the Aran Islands, the actual waking on the island and the being with the body all through the night.
Yeah.
And I just found
I want to get onto that, but none of you would be afraid of death. Are you afraid of death?
Not at all.
Not at all?
No,
These are brave words now.
I'm certain, I'm not, no, why would I be? Sure, I mean, it's the next step. We're continuously being born, we're continuously dying and being reborn in the course of our life.
Yes.
And I mean, we're assured, we come out of the womb. One of the things that I would make an analogy between death and birth is that when you're born, there's a struggle. You're in the womb and you die to the womb to be born. And you come out. And then you're dying in the course of your life to your child, to this. You died in the Late Late Show a few times. You said, you die to yourself and all that business. So it's literally, all you're doing then is you're dying to the body. You're just letting go of the body. So,
Christy, what was the funniest death you can recall in your days of chaplaincy?
I think the funniest death was, I had all these notions that a person should die what they call a holy death. So my job was to
Sorry
get them...
for laughing, I shouldn't have.
No, but my job was to get them oiled, get their hands crossed, get the habit on, get them pointed east and ready for takeoff. And then I could notch the calendar and say, another one for God. And I remember one man, he died using the most ferocious bad language. And we were all there, all being very holy and everything else, and he had what they call a period of lucidity. And he used it to terrific advantage. He nailed us individually and collectively.
Effing